Welcome back to the Full App Walkthrough series. We last left off with creating our bottom tab navigator, customizing it slightly, which I actually customized it a hair bit further than the last video. I switched it to a pencil icon, switched the labels as well. You can always figure out the documentation to customize those by looking at the React navigation website. And the bit of lab or homework you guys had as developers was making your own page to fill out that test screen component to be writing a new blog page. I didn't write anything fancy. I just used the React Native Elements inputs and a button with an on press. So looking at what we currently have so far, obviously your styling will be different, and hopefully you begin having fun and exploring with all the weird and neato things you can do in React Native versus raw, like old CSS you've been doing on browser side. I use both the input and the button element from React Native Elements in my demo here. I went ahead and wired up two pieces of state, typed them. I've also put them into my state object with blank strings. I tie them into my inputs as values with onChange text handlers that also set that piece of state. As you can see, the majority of my styling is typically flex 1, background colors, padding, and margin, and goofing with those values until I find something I semi-enjoy. The one thing you might not know you can do on these inputs, whether they are React Native text inputs or even the input element from React Native Elements, they have this multi-line Boolean variable that is default set to false, but you can set it to true by writing multi-line, which allows an input to span multi-lines almost like it was a text area. And I set a number of lines of 5 that I want this guy to take up. So with that, if we had started writing a bunch of lines in here, that'll actually go vertically instead of just going to the right and scrolling off the page. Or technically that'll be the right in the video land. That was opposite for me. Whatever. Either way, you don't want the text, a long blog post, just scrolling off the side of the page. You actually want it going vertically and growing vertically instead, so it's easier for the user to actually see what they're writing. Okay, and as usual, like using my font awesome icons to make them appear in the left hand of my inputs there. And as of right now, my onSubmit button does an onPress function called handleSubmit that right now is nothing. So let's go ahead and start building a couple things out. For those of you that already got this part working, sit back and relax and check out how I convert things, and maybe you can learn something on your current solution if you went ahead and did the advanced handleSubmit. I will first make sure that my API.ts utility does this right here, which if you guys remember from the curriculum earlier in our auth series videos, we need to get a token with our async storage, so I await my get access token, get the token itself. If it exists, I will go ahead and set my authorization bearer token. That way I can formulate my request for making a post request. With that refactor, we can go ahead and move into my blog form itself, and we're going to go ahead and try doing some logic. Before I do that, you guys have seen me do this in the auth series videos. We're going to make something called a private variable called saving that will be a Boolean variable with a default value of false. And what we're going to be doing is saying this is going to be preventing people from mashing that submit button like we've done before. There we go. And we'll do our finally, where we'll have this dot saving and toggle it back to false. The first thing that should happen would be this dot saving is set to true in the instance someone attempts the promise to resolve. When we try to make our post request, set it to true. That way this will not fire over and over again. If this dot saving is true, we should just return out of this function early and allow the promise to attempt to resolve if it's not behaving as quickly as we expected. This is a good little bit of wiring up to prepare for what we're going to be moving forward for. I'm going to also prepare by saying let a new blog equal a JavaScript object that will have a title property, which will be the value of this.state.title or whatever someone has placed into that. I'm going to need a body, I believe, in my database is what my database expects. So even though I called this state content, I believe I need body for my SQL database to actually post this correctly. And we need an author ID as well, and I can hard code 6 because I know that's one of mine, but we're going to do that in a more smart way. We are going to go ahead and go down to our promise here. We're going to be trying to get something. Beneath my this.saving, I'm going to first off attempt to fill in this value of the user, which we actually have that available on our JSON utility from our API utility file. We have the ability to do that. So I can say let my user equal await a get user from my API util promise resolve, and that should go ahead and give me that auto import up top there. And all I really care about out of that get user, if you guys recall what it does, it actually just gets the user object, which has a role and a user ID. I don't really care about the role in this instance, so instead of just getting the entire user object, I can use a little bit of ES6 to say, just get me the user ID that returns from that promise. It has an object with the user ID property on it, and I want to pull off that property and make a variable for it here in this file, which I can then say my new blog object author ID is going to be equal to the new value of user ID. And so this should override that null property with whatever user's logged in. In my instance, it should be 6 for Luke Skywalker, for my demo anyway. And then we're going to go ahead and do our normal logic of awaiting our JSON utility, which I'm going to auto import and confirm that did that correctly up there. And it's going to make a fetch request. I'm going to go to my all blogs component here and copy the API destination. I happen to have an endpoint, probably like you guys do, that's just /API/blogs, and it's a post request. So remember, our JSON utility helper here took a secondary argument, optional. I'm going to specify it as a type post, and along with that, I need to pass in some kind of object I need to convert into my request body, and that happens to be my new blog. Cool. And that should allow itself to resolve, and if it results in a OK response, that means we probably have posted the blog successfully. So we can then say, well, we want to maybe navigate back to the all blogs page. So because I have my navigation props here, this happens to be a nested component inside of my post blog screen. So I had to do that trick we did with our blog preview card, where we had to do a export default with navigation blog form that allow us to have this navigation injected props available on a subcomponent that is not a main screen. If you guys remember how to do that, go back to the beginning of this series and check out how we did the blog preview cards, where we actually did this higher order component in order to access the prop navigation.navigate. So if a blog successfully posts, we want to do a this.props.navigation.navigate, and we want to go back to the all blogs key, and that key, if you recall, is the first page in the blog stack, or our app stack. Now, there's something interesting about doing it this way versus, we should probably console log an error too now that I'm down here. I mean, granted, hopefully it doesn't mess up, but it's always good to have like your little syntax you just go through so you can have some error handling. That way, if something does go wrong, you actually caught it, and I got imported up here. Anyway, what's interesting about React navigation versus the traditional browser routing. So a lot of you guys have coming into this application, this mobile app here, from developing React-style web apps, especially using React Router DOM. Matter of fact, the entire final project and final exam, or your blog project rather, are built using that very same tech stack, the one we're using here. And you could do a this.props.history.push and move to a new component screen, or move to a new path, and that path would then cause an unmount on the current component and another will mount and did mount on that incoming component. Unfortunately, with React navigation, in order to be efficient and fast loading, it actually caches or remembers or saves the state of these old screens. So what we're going to notice here, that if I do post a new blog, it will correctly navigate to the all blogs screen stack. And what's going to happen is this component did mount will only fire on my app load. So if I post a new blog, this will not fire if I navigate back to it, because React navigation has persisted the screen and state. So I don't get another unmount on my previous component, I don't get another did mount on this component, and everything ends up needing a refresh, which is not great user experience, but let's see if we can go ahead and demo that before I get too far ahead of myself, like show you what I mean as an example. So I'm going to refresh my application here, and we're going to go to my back to my post blog screen and say something like, did it work as a title? And it probably didn't, unless of course I've been lying to myself this entire time. I'm going to submit this blog and hope that the promise resolves, and it sends me over back to the all blog screen. So it worked correctly. Scrolling down to the bottom now, you'll notice that, oh, check that out. I don't have any new blogs available to display on my blog screen. That's weird. So again, if I reload this manually and have it evidently crash, lovely. Oh, never mind, there we go. I must have hit a wrong hotkey somewhere, or my app did crash in the simulator, which the simulator is not true to life. Anytime you code something in a simulator, make sure you test it on a real-life device because it will behave differently. My computer, even though it's fairly good running a simulator, things have experienced slowdown and are not true to life on how they might behave on an actual device. So always test on actual devices before you deploy this to a store. However, that notwithstanding, there is our did it work blog here, right? It probably didn't. Indeed, it didn't. We had to actually force reload this in order for it to work. So how do we fix that problem? Okay, so there's actually a thing in the React Native documentation here, or the React Navigation documentation, that actually goes over this. We can bring in this navigation events component from the React Navigation library. And this component is a way of subscribing to certain events. Meaning, if this component screen is focused again, then we want to run some kind of logic to get our new blogs. So this is going to take a little bit of refactoring compared to what you're used to, and we're going to head over to allblogs.tsx to do so. Instead of doing a component did mount right now, I'm going to do a couple things to set up. I'm going to go ahead and paste that navigation events component from React Navigation. It will go, I believe, within your view element. Like, it will have to be nested in a view, obviously, since you can't have sibling elements. I can't have React Navigation events next to my view because that will have two components being returned, and I can't have that in any kind of JSX or TSX. So I'm going to do a navigation events. It's a self-closing tag, and there's a prop called onDidFocus is the one we want. It's going to run some kind of callback function, and we're actually going to make and convert this component did mount into something else. Now, while it works for the first time in the app load, it doesn't work on subsequent events. So there's a number of ways we can refactor this if you wanted to. I'm actually going to change this to something called _getBlogs. And I'm also going to include this in a this._getBlogs on construction. So when this component runs its constructor, hopefully it gets all blogs and sets it to state correctly. And then down here, I can also get away with saying on focus, run my this._getBlogs function. Hopefully that asynchronous function correctly resolves, and when it does, it sets a new piece of state. So now when we are forcefully navigated back to this all blogs component page, we are no longer reliant on that component did mount because we know it does not work on forced navigation using React Navigation. So that's one major difference from React Router DOM that you guys need to get used to and keep in mind as you code out your apps. So I'm going to again force reload my application, and we're going to come back to my new component screen, or my new blog screen, where I'm going to say this time it's magic. And the content will be, Submit that blog, come back to the main screen, and without having to do another force reload, there it is at the very bottom where we have our, this time it's magic. Awesome. That's a cool little refactor, but one more thing you'll notice is because a screen state is persisted, if we go back to our new add blog page, it remembered the pieces of state that I had typed in just a second ago. So that the reverse is also true. We left a page and there's no will unmount. There's nothing or did unmount. There's no logic that says this must empty in order for it to work. So I'm going to run another set state and do my usual tactic of emptying both my title piece of state and my content piece of state back to blank strings. That way, if someone wants to add multiple blogs in the same session without a reload, they do not have to worry about state persisting between new blog posts. That should take care of this issue we just encountered right here. Now, I did mention in the last video we're going to talk about perhaps what a picker is and how to use one, but I figured this would be a good short video to show you guys how to handle React Navigation's nuances if you're coming from a browser-based environment. So with that little refactor, hopefully you guys are having a good time with this. And we will talk about how to make a drop-down style picker in our native apps. So we'll see you then.